Hi everyone, I'm Juan Gonzalez. I'm from California, but I went to school on the East Coast. And a little bit of background about me: I'm the Pathways Director for Education System Center. But my parents didn't go to college or anything like that. My parents never even graduated high school in Mexico, so like they kind of had, when they came to this country, they had no real understanding of like how to get through high school, let alone how to get through college. So I had the good luck that my older sister went to college, and she kind of like made sure that I went to college as a result. So, and that was really like a helpful experience. So my work in the last 10 years around education has been around kind of education policy. We can talk about kind of the programs and the ways things operate to help students. And what I'm going to try to do to you is, I've been doing a lot of work. I've been working with a lot of like high school counselors, a lot of high school teachers, a lot of principals. And then we've been talking about this notion of a pathway, or the idea that like young people need to be coached or given information about what is a potentially good career and how you could get like a good job or a good career going as early as maybe like your freshman or sophomore year of high school, right? And that people say, everybody knows like, oh, like what a doctor is and what a doctor does, but very few people know, well, how much does a doctor make? What does it take to be a doctor? Or how long does it take to be a doctor, right? And then, or more importantly, like, well, if I don't want to be a doctor, what else could I be if I wanted to work in health or health science, right? So this notion of like giving people the information about what is like all the types of jobs in a certain industry and how you could get those jobs and how much money they make, so young people can make a better decision about, hey, if I really want to do this, I should be taking these courses or having these kind of jobs or these internships or side hustles, even if you want, right? Like, so I can really get ready for that type of career. And it's not about like being certain, like, oh, I'm going to be a nurse, or I'm going to be a doctor, but at least like, yes, I actually do like health and medicine, or no, I don't like that at all. So I've been doing a lot of this work with principals, teachers, and administrators. And I really wanted to kind of work with you all to get a sense of like what information is actually very helpful and digestible to young people who are in high school, people who are about to enter college, and what is the information that is like very useful for you to know and you would probably use for the rest of your life. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to start off is I'm just going to take a baseline understanding. I think someone is on the phone, but I think you should be able to kind of see a poll question come up. So we're just going to do like a baseline understanding of some questions. When I run the poll for all of you now, you're going to see all the questions pop up on your screen, but I have slides for each question and I can kind of clarify what I mean by certain questions. So I'm going to launch the polls now, and you guys should be seeing them. So my first question that you'll see on the poll, question number 1, is like, who's your best source of information about what level of education or career you may want to pursue, right? Do you talk to your family members? Do you talk to extended family, your school counselor? Is your best kind of person to talk to about this is a teacher, or are you in some like after school program where there's a mentor or that helps you with those kind of things? So just go ahead and kind of look at the answers and the options here. And if you guys can vote on kind of what is your preferred or best source of information on average, that would be helpful for us to get started. So kind of wait for everyone to get a chance to vote. And if you're not being able to see the poll, just let me know. But you all should have a poll on your screen, and you should be able to click on kind of some options as well. I think I've only seen one person find that as of now. Okay. The next question you'll see come up on the poll is, when thinking about like a potential career, what factor do you weigh most when considering a career option? I mean, do you think about like, hey, how much money the job might make? Do you think about like how people perceive the role and the respectability of the role? Do you care a lot about what maybe like your family might say or kind of think about? Adrian's not in. Have you? You might have to fill out all the options and then click submit versus maybe one option. I don't know if that's helpful. for this question, also thinking about like, what are the things that maybe sometimes folks think about a career based on like, hey, this is what I'm good at right now. This is what I want to do or may want to do. Things like that. The third question you'll see is just, do you know what the minimum wage is in the state of Illinois? Like, what is the minimum amount you have to make per hour as required by law, or that someone would have to pay you? The fourth question you'll guys will see is, what do you think, or what do you guess is the living wage in Illinois? And what that means is, what do you think it means how much money would you have to make per hour or over a year so that you could live by yourself and pay all your bills and kind of live without, being in poverty, for example, right? So what do you guess is like that living wage for the state of Illinois? And then kind of we'll pause there for a second. If anyone has any questions on some of the questions, feel free to just kind of text or kind of ask me out loud, and I can definitely kind of address those as well. Well, just give it 30 more seconds. Adrian, were you able to get to submit, or was that helpful? So. Okay. Maybe if you'd like,
he could put his answers in the chat.
Yeah, I was gonna say putting the answers in the chat. I'm not sure if that's easy enough, but like I think I also put the link to the presentation in the chat. So maybe if you want to just like copy paste like the answers that you would do, so that you don't have to type all too much, that would be okay. That'd be helpful too.
I would say, Adrian, too, I can answer for you. Even if you want to like direct message me or something, I can enter it so it shows up. But that might be adding a layer of complication.
It might be.
That we don't need to do, but I'm putting it out there.
Okay. I am gonna end the polling in kind of like 10 seconds. So I just want to, and then when I end the polling, I'll be able to show the results and stuff like that. I think we're at a good spot. I think almost everyone has submitted except Adrian. So I'm just going to do this. And then let's kind of like look through the results. So are you guys able to see kind of the results and kind of what ultimately ended up happening, right? So for those about like who's your best source of information, it was kind of split between your immediate family, so like mom, dad, siblings, but also like a formal program or mentor, which I think is like a very good sign and a very good source of information as well. For many of you, it seems like when thinking about potential careers, the thing that you consider the most is how passionate or good you will be at aspects of the work, right? So you're probably thinking about like, hey, will I like this job? Will I like this career? Most everyone answered correctly, the minimum wage currently in the state of Illinois. So yes, that is currently $11 per hour. And folks were guessing about what is the minimum living wage in Illinois currently. And people were guessed around $20 an hour. So we're going to get into a little bit about kind of what the true answer is. So I'll save kind of my thoughts on that one, on that one for a little bit. And let's go to the next one. So the next thing I want to kind of present to you guys is I want to do like a little bit of a comparison and contrast on the minimum wage versus the median wage versus the living wage, and kind of just giving you a basic introduction of how administrators, but also like economists and people who help people find jobs for a living think about all these aspects of kind of the job, right? So the answer was yes, $11 per hour, right? That is the current minimum wage in Illinois, and that's actually going to grow to $15 an hour by the year 2025. So it's going to grow $1 a year until 2025, which is kind of like there's a big movement in the country to try to get the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Funny story, not funny story, but by federal law, the minimum wage is $7.50 an hour, $7.25. So Illinois is already above the federal law, but in the city of Chicago and in the Cook County, Illinois, that it's almost, I think it's up to like $13 an hour. I might be wrong. So, and it's going to be increasing as well. So the point is, there's a federal minimum wage law, then there's your state's minimum wage law, and then like cities and counties will have different ones as well. And they could adjust those based on kind of whatever decisions they want to make in their by a local elected official. The only exception to this is like jobs where you get tips. So thinking of like waiters and bartenders, right? Their minimum wage is lower than $11 an hour, but the idea is that they are probably getting tipped, and that puts them over that minimum threshold. But their minimum wage by law in many places is lower. Now, when people talk about like, well, what is the average wage in a region, in the state, or what is the average amount that like a doctor or a lawyer or like a mechanic makes? When people are talking about the typical, it's actually the most often they're talking about the median wage. That means like 50% of people making more and 50% of people are making less than that. So I know this is like kind of like a throwback to kind of some of your high school math classes and statistics classes. So median is where everyone talks about the median wage or the average wage. They're really talking about the median, and it really gives us a good picture or the most accurate picture on like how much a job makes or a career, an occupation makes for the people working there. Now, living wage. And kind of I hinted at this before, the living wage is kind of there's this growing movement, this is growing momentum in our country about that, like, hey, we shouldn't be talking about the minimum wage and we shouldn't even be talking about the median wage. What we actually should be talking about is the living wage, meaning what is the amount of money people need to make in order to be able to kind of cover their expenses, cover their bills, and sustain themselves in a relatively healthy way, right? Now, this doesn't even mean that people are saving for like buying a house or like retiring. It's just so that they can have enough money to just pay their bills monthly, right? And this living wage will change based on how many people live in your house, how many adults are in your house, how many children of the adults, how many of them are working or not. So this will kind of change over time. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to help you. I'm going to kind of send you guys to like what I think is a very simple but kind of cool website that gives you the living wage based on where you live in the country or based on where you live in the United States. So this is called the MIT Living Wage Calculator. And they kind of refresh this every year. And what they're looking at is like, given the average cost, like meaning like the typical expenses in a part of the country, what would it take to live and survive in that part of the country in a reasonable way? So I'm going to click on the state of Illinois, but you could also, if you were to ever go to this webpage, you can click on a city like Chicago and kind of look for that. You can look for like a county. So like, someone is from Rockford, so I would look for, McHenry County, somewhere nearby, things of that nature. You can type in a city or state, and it will give you the living wage for that region. But right now I'm going to look at the living wage for the state of Illinois. So these are all the counties in Illinois that you see here, but I'm going to click at the results for the whole state of Illinois. So what you see here, what it breaks down is the living wage given how many people are in your family, how many adults, and how many children are in that family, right? So if you were one adult living by yourself with no kids, you would need to make $15 an hour to be at a living wage, right? And then to calculate how many hours of like what is the annual salary per year, that would be $15 an hour times 2,080 hours, right? 2,080 hours is if someone worked full time every week of the year. So that would be around like $31,000 a year living wage just by yourself to live randomly somewhere in the state of Illinois. This cost goes up significantly if you are an adult and you have children, right? And if you have kids, obviously kids cost a lot. You got to pay for childcare, you got to feed them, you got to pay for their clothes, so on and so forth. So it gets more expensive, and it gets cheaper if there's more than one adult in the household, right? If there's two parents or like a mom and a grandma living and working together or living together, they're able to help each other out. Like that's a more common examples, and you'll see how this number changes based on the size of the family, right? So that's kind of the calculation of the living wage in Illinois. I'm gonna go back here to this location. Now, what I'd like to do is kind of get you guys an opportunity to be a little more familiar with this tool. What I'd like to do is take a pause, and I want everyone I've just put in the link to the living wage calculator this website I'm sharing right now. And I'd like you guys to kind of click on it and look for your county, look for your part of the state, and kind of compare that with like, what is a living wage? And then we'll kind of circle back with, is that amount something you expected, you're surprised about? Or if people want to just start chiming in with that, like when you hear that living wage number, is that something that shocks you? Does it make sense? Or do you have more questions? So I'll just give you guys a minute to kind of play around with this webpage real quick. And then I will kind of call on some folks randomly and we'll go from there. I'm looking at the first person on my kind of participant list that pops up is Adrian. Adrian, I don't know if you have any, if you were able to kind of go to the link and share with us what you're thinking about or what county you were looking at.
I was looking at Cook County because I live in Chicago, and I'm not surprised by like the the type of wage that we would need to make in order to kind of like live like in this county, because it is such an expensive place to live in. So that's kind of, I wasn't really surprised by the amount of money. So
Isabella Escatel, I don't know if you were able to click around and look in your region.
Yeah, so I went to my county and ours is like a smaller one. So yeah, I wasn't really surprised either by how like low it is compared to everyone's.
Yeah, I think looking back at our poll results, I think all of you were kind of close to the living, when the majority of you kind of selected a living wage that was accurate for one adult living by themselves. So you guys had like a good sense of what it would take to live by yourself. It was like, I think most of you put like at $20 an hour, which would cover your expenses if you're living by yourself. But unfortunately, like if you had a child or in a family, the cost like more like nearly double, right? So it's like this big jump from living by yourself to living in a family or with children. And I think like it gets the living wage. What I always kind of try to tell folks is the living wage for an adult with a child, or maybe two adults, one child, and is this the one right here, is really around like 25 to, or like $28, $30 an hour. And that's become something that I really try to, when I work with administrators, principals, or work with people who talk to young people about like jobs, I was like, you really got to encourage young people to choose or to think about occupations that are hovering around the 28 and over mark, right? We want, if someone were to have a child and had to live by themselves, we need them to have a job that they can live and kind of sustain themselves, right? Or many times in our families, like we live and we support like our older parents or a grandma that lives with us, and they're not working. So we got to be able to like not only support ourselves, but an additional family member. So that $30 an hour becomes kind of my informal kind of best practice idea of what I want folks to do. But yeah, and then Chicago and Illinois is not like, it's not the most expensive state to live in, but it's also not the cheapest. It's very like middle of the road. But even Chicago compared to other major cities is not as expensive as New York or Los Angeles. And the real reason for that is, if you scroll down here, kind of when you look at a living wage calculator, there's some other aspects I want to show you guys, which is the typical expenses. What this tries to kind of calculate is what is a typical cost per year that someone spends on food, childcare, medical, and the real big cost, what happens is when people start to have children, the cost per year really skyrocket in that regards. And that's really becomes a really kind of most expensive thing, in addition to housing. Housing is always by far the most expensive thing we always have to work on, and things of that nature. Oh, thank you, Anna. Yes, kind of, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, Anna, and chime in.
Yeah, I was clicking through different counties because I wanted to know the minimum wage for all of them. But then I realized that the poverty wage was so very close to the federal wage. So that's something that I found, it kind of blows my mind that it's so close to the federal wage, knowing that the federal wage is something that, if we didn't have that state minimum wage, it'd be something that we would have to deal with. So to me, it's like so many people will live in poverty if we stuck to that federal minimum wage.
Yeah. And it's also like what's even more interesting, right, is like our state minimum wage is going to $15 an hour by 2025, but the cost of living in Illinois will be higher by 2025. So the living wage will actually be higher than $15 an hour, way higher than $15 an hour by the time we get to a minimum wage of $15 an hour. So it's just like this weird dynamic where like, yes, the wage is increasing, but it's not increasing fast enough so that someone could live and sustain themselves. So that's something that I think is a very important thing to think about over time. Required annual income before taxes mean, yes. So for those of you who have worked or are working, you know, when you get a paycheck, let's say you work 10 hours at $10 an hour, your paycheck is not actually $100, right? They take out your taxes, right? And then so your paycheck becomes like $80 versus 100, right? So what that number is saying is, what is the number you have to reach before they take out taxes? So what would be that $100? Like what would be have to be your hourly rate or your annual income before they start deducting taxes and you start kind of having your income reduced. So it would be many times it's known as your gross income versus your net income. Your net income is after the government takes away your taxes. I don't know, Ides, if that was helpful. But it's like, how much money do you have to earn before taxes in order to even still have the living wage? You will still meet the living wage component. Great, thank you all. I want to kind of pivot a little bit as like, all right, now that we know kind of what it takes to live in our society or in our region of the country, right? I want to talk about a little bit about what, like, okay, how do I start to choose a career, an occupation, or a job so that I can be happy in my work and do work that I enjoy, but also be able to sustain myself and my family, right? Over time. So first of all, I think we like many times we use the words like job, occupation, or career, and like they mean the same thing, and they're all in the same umbrella, but the Department of Labor uses them a little differently, or like the government uses them a little differently. And I think that they're very helpful to think about that, right? So a job is just like what you kind of show up to do at your workplace, right? That is like your job, right? So if you're like a cashier, if you kind of work for education systems, that is your job, is like your job description. Occupation really should be thought of as more about like the things that you do at your job, the type of like education you needed to get your job, the wages associated with your job. So it's a little more of a bigger picture, right? The occupation is like thinking of you as a professional and what it took to get to you to be a professional and what you might be doing after, or what are the types of activities you're doing. What typically someone does who has your job or occupation. And so it's more general, right? Like other people like you doing the same occupation. So if you're a teacher, you can be a teacher in Chicago or a teacher in Peoria or a teacher in Rockford, but like that is an occupation where being a teacher is similar in all three areas with only minor differences. And then finally, career is what you do over a lifetime, right? So your career is like what you've done over a lifetime, not only what your job is or jobs have been, but also like what was your training? Are you a part of an association? Do you collaborate, or are you friends with other people in your career and in your occupation? And do you guys work together to make your occupation better? Do you volunteer as a part of your occupation? So sometimes if you think about it, like let's say I'm a mechanic, right? But there's a union or an association for other mechanics like me. And over time, I'm very involved in my union. That gets considered to be a part of my like career as well. Right. Thank you for that kind of that point, Isaiah, about multiple jobs. And that's really kind of one of the reasons why like raising, like that's why many people, elected officials, talk about raising the minimum wage, right? There's no reason someone should have a job and work 40 hours a week and no vacation and still be below poverty, right? So that's one of the reasons that like raising the minimum wage or choosing an occupation or building towards an occupation where you can work a normal amount of time and sustain yourself becomes a very important consideration. For the rest of my presentation, I'm going to be really focused on the phrase occupation, right? So like what do the typical people who have the same job description are doing regardless of where they work? So like if you're a nurse, it doesn't matter if you work in Rockford or in Chicago or in kind of Carbondale, Illinois, nurses in those are going to be considered as part of the same occupation, kind of doing the same kind of things, even though their wages might be different or their day-to-day activities are different. So thinking about occupations is kind of where I want you guys focused on. Now, for what folks don't know is that the federal government collects for most jobs. The federal government collects a lot of data about how much money people make in terms of in a typical job, how many people are hired, how many people are going to be hired over the next 10 years, which companies or which industries are doing really well and which ones are doing bad. And it collects this information just by surveying like employers and surveying like kind of like companies and things of that nature, and also in surveying employees, right? And asking them like, hey, what level of education do you have and what's your salary? And then is that typical for other people like you, or do you have more education than other people in your job, or vice versa, right? And the government collects all this data, kind of compiles it, and like doesn't publish your individual information, but what it does, it publishes like the average information, like after hundreds of thousands of people or millions of people collects, like this is what typically a teacher makes, this is what typically a professor makes, this is what the average mechanic makes, things of that nature. And it provides that information to show trends and kind of how society is moving or where it should be moving over time. So let me get rid of it. Let me go back. Now, what I want to show you is, what I'm going to show you next is kind of the Department of Labor. So this is the federal government's website. And what I'm going to show you is what it collects about most occupations, or kind of how it describes most occupations. So if you just kind of follow along with me here, I know I'm still sharing my screen, but this is the web page or the site for a nurse. And it goes specifically a registered nurse, right? So the government publishes information, a job description, right? Typically, what does a registered nurse do? Right? And it kind of provides an information, and it also gives synonyms, like how are nurses, what are other names for nurses, or what are job descriptions saying for typical nurses, right? What I like about the kind of Department of Labor, many times they make like videos showing or displaying what a nurse does. So many times that video is very helpful for folks and very kind of beneficial to make sense of the words on the screen. What I really like to look at is kind of the projected employment. Is like how many people are currently hired as registered nurses in Illinois, and how many are going to be hired 10 years from now? What is the percent change, and how many jobs annually, how many jobs are posted annually in the state for registered nurses in Illinois and the United States? And then what you'll see here, this is like a really cool chart here on the left where it says typical wages, and it provides to you the average or median salary for kind of for a registered nurse in the state. At the high end, like the most experienced or like awesome nurses make $100,000. Kind of nurses that are at the 10th percentile at the bottom left, those are nurses probably that are just starting. Right? They just got hired as a nurse, and they're or just starting as a nurse right out of college, right? And they're making $50,000 a year, and kind of their trajectory over time. What I like about this chart is like you can make it seem like a line. You can do it per hour, or you can do it as an annual wage. So it kind of gives you both options. You can see it as a chart and as a table, things like that, right? This information is very helpful here too. What does it take to get started as a nurse, right? And what is showing here is like the typical nurse starts or is required to have a bachelor's degree, right? And then it kind of, if you click, I wouldn't recommend you click on this now, but it also, the Department of Government looks based on where your computer or your laptop is, it recommends for you what are places in your area that train people to be registered nurses. So in this case, it'll probably be a lot of universities or local colleges. This is what I think, this kind of section here is really cool, typical education. It gives you the, like of all the people working as nurses right now, how many of them have a master's degree, a bachelor's degree, or an associate's degree, or breakdown by kind of level of education. And then it gives you information about like what does a nurse do daily? What are the types of things that they need to know, the kind of skills they need to have? This is all based on like the surveys of employers and kind of individual people, and it compiles that up. And what I like here at the bottom left, it says like, okay, I know I want to be in like some kind of nurse, but I don't know if I want to be a registered nurse. Is there other kind of nurses out there? And like this website gives links to other nurses that you can then click on and explore as well, or similar jobs, and get a sense of what those jobs make and what those jobs do, right? So for example, I clicked on respiratory therapist and I opened that page, and it gives me once again the video, the description, the same information in the same format for that occupation as well. So it's like a very helpful way to kind of look at a job and look at other jobs like it and keep learning about a whole industry or a whole like health science field and stuff like that, right? So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna copy this link. Now we are gonna take a quick, I wanna highlight a couple of things before I kind of move on, right? So as I mentioned before, I showed you that chart for registered nurses, their wages. I wanted to kind of remind you again what the living wage was that I always use, which is around $30 an hour for an adult kind of with one child as like just what I think is the right goal that people should have for like a living wage. And as you can see, kind of like a majority of registered nurses in this case make above that living wage. So they're mostly going to be living and able to sustain themselves, right? I'm assuming they don't have like weird expenses or weird situations. In terms of education level, there's also what I think is kind of a weird contradiction in the data, but something that you should think about, right? Not a contradiction. So if you see here, a majority of nurses, a slight majority, have a bachelor's degree and a vast majority have a bachelor's degree or higher, right? But there's some level of nurses that are working in this job currently with only an associate's degree. And it's like, well, how are they able to do that, right? So what happens is there's a lot of nurses maybe who are older who started working with just an associate's degree and got hired and were able to keep working as associate's degree. But the Department of Labor said that the education experience to get started, the requirement is now a bachelor's degree. So what that means is like maybe a generation ago, you could have gotten hired with an associate's degree and started working as a nurse. But in a more modern era, you now are probably going to be required to have a bachelor's degree. So what it shows you is that jobs change over time in terms of their minimum requirements, right? It used to be that if you want to be like work at a childcare center and just kind of work as a teaching assistant or a childcare, all you needed was a high school diploma. But over time, that kind of job is changing and they're requiring an associate's degree at least, or maybe even a bachelor's degree over time. So it just goes to show you things that you should look at when looking at the data. And that's kind of the difference I wanted to point out and kind of show you guys there and here and there. For projected employment, one thing I wanted to show you guys is this kind of window right here when you're looking at data, right? So what the government is predicting that in the state of Illinois, in the next 10 years, there's going to be around 16 to 17,000 new nurses hired in the profession, but the annual job opening is 9,000. And I'm like, wait, I don't get that. If you were to hire 9,000 nurses per year for 10 years, that'd be 90,000 new nurses, right? And what you really shouldn't be calculating it that way. What this is showing is nurses change jobs, right? Like I'm a registered nurse and I'm working at like one hospital in Chicago, but my husband got a job or like my wife got a job in the suburbs and now have to move and now I have to move out there. So I'm still a registered nurse. I just got a new job in the suburbs and someone is going to replace me in my old job. But that like where I used to work hasn't added new nurses. It just replaced the one that left or retired. Right. So there's going to be a lot of turnover, a lot of people changing jobs. But in this case, for nurses, there's a lot of jobs annually in the state for nurses, but there's also going to be a growth. There's going to be more nurses over time, not just replacing the ones that change or kind of retire. So this is kind of a very promising profession and something that is going to be like healthcare is just going to be growing a lot as a lot of folks get older or need kind of additional care in society. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to take we're going to do breakout groups, and I'm going to give you guys an opportunity to explore the Department of Labor webpage and also have like a little bit of a debate amongst your groups. So this is what you're going to do. You're going to break out into, I'm going to break you everyone into 3 groups. Some of the Anna, Heather, and Edith, I'm going to kind of add you into a group with each of the young people, with Student Advisory Council members. And you guys are going to be kind of working on a mini assignment that'll end today, right? Which is, all right, imagine that there's a high school senior or a recent high school graduate that you know, and that they come from a working class background, they're not rich. And I think that's important because sometimes rich people can make mistakes in what they do for their career and they don't have to suffer. They just go do something else because they're rich. But like for the majority of us is we have to be very intelligent about what we're going to go to college to do, what we're going to study, because we can't waste time or waste money, right? So I think that's something, think of like someone like that. And this person is not like the greatest student. It's not like a 4.0 student. They're not amazing or not going to be like an astronaut or anything like that. They're just kind of a very normal, average person, right? We all know someone like that. I was very much like that in many points of my career. So just like trying to figure out what I'm going to do, right? Now, this person comes to you and is like, hey, I want to go to college. And randomly, there's 3 jobs that I really like, and I'm trying to choose between them. And they come to you for advice. I want you, I'm going to put the link to the slide deck here for all of you guys once more time. But I really want you guys to kind of look at the Department of Labor's website for each of these jobs, look at their salary, look at the skills, look at the kind of a level of education it takes to do those. And I want you guys to in your group, decide like, what would you guys in your group recommend to them? Or like, hey, we actually think, given your background, we really think you should do this job, right? And there's really no right answer or wrong answer. I really just want you guys to kind of think about the various variables of a career and just kind of give the person a recommendation based on your best judgment or best advice that you can think of, right? Now, assume that this person would like each of these jobs equally and randomly, right? So they have no preference for teaching or being a mechanic. All that stuff is the same to them. They're just trying to make the right choices. All right. Okay, everyone, we're gonna spend like about 10-15 minutes in 10 minutes in your room, and then afterwards we're gonna come back, and then every group is gonna present out like, hey, this is what we recommended and why. And this is what we cared about the most, and this is kind of the thing we wanted to emphasize the most. And Edith will probably stay in the overall like group. So if someone has a question or concern, you can like text that to Edith, and I'll probably join one of the groups as well, just to kind of see if you guys have any questions or concerns. So, all right, look forward to seeing you guys in the breakout. Let's start with group 1. Group 1, do you have your spokesperson kind of, so what you want to share with us of kind of where you guys landed?
Yes, so I'm the spokesperson for group 1, and we decided on the physical therapist assistant. And the main reason why we kind of went that way was because we really kind of wanted to focus on like not the best GPA and kind of average on the SAT scores. And we saw that the education level, most of the physical therapist assistants, they have an associate's degree. And so we figured that this would be a very achievable goal for someone. And then also the opportunities are going to be more likely in the future. So it's going to be able to grow. And then also the wage was a very good price for, you know, what type of education they were getting and how well they were doing as well.
Mm-hmm. Was there any like hardcore debate or internal like disagreements, or did you guys kind of settle on that?
Yeah, there was kind of like a general consensus that was the one that was we thought was the best.
Okay. How about group 2?
So the reason we chose what we chose, or at least I'm assuming the consensus is, the general consensus was worst option. Well, not necessarily worst, but the option least favorable would be the elementary school teacher. Just simply because they're likely, well, not likely, they are underpaid for what they're worth, even though it is the most, I guess, financially stable option. But mentally and physically, the stress of it, and also having a bachelor's degree, he clearly displayed through his subpar GPA and average test scores that school is not his favorite thing to go to. He'd rather go to church instead, quote unquote. So with that, he would probably prefer the least amount of education possible to make sure that he can start working immediately. The vote that we chose for number 1, however, was the bus driver, simply because of the, well, bus driver mechanic and whatnot, to move into more of a mechanical field later on in life. And also that job requires no previous work experience. So the second he gets his diploma, he can immediately start working, he can immediately start saving money, he can immediately start feeding himself, and he can start deciding whether or not he wants to go back to college for those higher opportunities. But the first thing that should come to your mind when you're leaving a house is making sure that you can keep a house. And so because of that, even though it's the lowest paying job, it would probably be the easiest and the most maintainable option for him.
Anyone, and I think, who was it? I did want to have kind of someone from my group had some good points. Paranjay, if you can share kind of your initial thoughts on why you had initially suggested the elementary school teacher. I feel like just for like devil's advocate, folks should hear that as well.
So my thinking was that the elementary school teacher had a better platform to expand their job opportunities by possibly pursuing higher degrees or higher education.
Okay. And then potentially earning more when you have like master's levels or degrees and stuff.
Yeah.
All right, now group 3.
So I always do this, and we did not assign a spokesperson. Literally every time I do this. But does someone want to share?
I can share. So we basically agreed that the physical therapist assistant would be like the most attainable for him, since it's not really, it doesn't need as much education, post-secondary education as an elementary teacher, but it also doesn't just need a high school diploma. And it would be like an easier goal for him to obtain, since he isn't really like, he doesn't have a GPA of 4.0 or like, and has average SAT score. So it's like an easier goal, but it's still like a high goal. So we thought that the physical therapist assistant would be the best job for him.
Great. Thank you all. So there's no right answer and there's no wrong answer. It's just kind of like, there's just kind of like thoughts and variables and things you consider and and things like that, right? And essentially a lot of you guys are doing a lot of this thinking and processing as well, right? Like, hey, what do I like? What do I want to accomplish? What do I want to do? What do my family say? You know, every one of us like kind of is navigating and managing these kind of conversations, right? So what I want to do next is really going to be a couple, like 5 more minutes of just a lot of your feedback to us as an organization through the Illinois Student Assistance Commission to Education System Center, right? What I would love if folks kind of can start putting in the chat, or, you know, if you feel bold enough to just kind of raise your hand and say like, hey, I want to share this. Like when you kind of learned about the concept of the living wage, was it helpful? Was it higher or lower than it expected? Did it change your perception of something that was a good salary or not? And do you and or like answer any one of these questions in the chat or raising your hand is like, did it is that something that you feel should be taught more in high school or college to young people and things of that nature? So kind of looking for y'all's feedback and kind of learning from you guys about how you understood that concept here today.
I'm feeling bold. So
go for it.
With the living wage, I was very quickly introduced to this topic the second I started working, because I was told by everyone, no matter how much you work, you're not going to get paid the correct amount because how young you are, how little experience you have, which is why they encouraged me to do my own catering and whatnot. Did not actually, I was aware that there was a poverty line. I never looked into it because I was like, well, I can feed myself, so I'm going to consider myself not poor. And then I realized one of my jobs pays like $2 more than the poverty line. And the other one is only varied because I personally decide how much I charge people for the delicacies that they enjoy from my kitchen. And it was a little bit of an eye-opener for me, because if I didn't do catering, I would be pretty much $1 or $2 away from the poverty line. So that I kind of have a new appreciation for my father, who encouraged me to go and get a knife and get a stove and get a little rentable kitchen and start cooking. Yeah, so I appreciate that a lot more now. But the concept of a living wage, I'm going to be honest, it was lower than I expected.
I'm seeing Carell, thank you for that. Oh yes, I see your point, Carell, about kind of the difference between how a minimum, you thought like the minimum wage is supposed to equal the living wage, but in reality it's not, right? So yeah, I think that I also had that perception for a long time until I was, you know, working in adult, kind of learn about what it takes to live as well. Thank you.
I was looking at the same thing as Carell, because it was like, imagine like one parent has like 3 kids and they're working a minimum wage job. Like, how are they like able, they have to take care of all those kids. Like they have to make that $10 work. So it's just like, it put a lot of things into perspective.
Thank you, Michaela. Thank you. Those of you might be chatting and kind of submitting something in a second. I did want to kind of have the next question. If you kind of already answered and kind of would be willing to reflect on this, which is raising your hand or kind of put into the chat or kind of be bold and share, which is like thinking back to your original answer about what potential careers, what factor do you weigh the most? now that you've kind of learned about the living wage, or you learned about kind of the education level, or had the opportunity to look at that there's information about the education, the wages, the growth of an occupation, would any of that, would that new information, or knowing that there's information like that, change how you kind of would consider a career that you would want to do? And anyone kind of want to share, feel free to jump in.
Personally, for me, the reason why I'm choosing culinary as my career is specifically because I have the power to essentially decide my own wage as well as my backup myself. So I wouldn't say it changed my mind, but it definitely solidified.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I think that I want to be infectious disease doctor. So I think I'm not necessarily in it for the money, more for the passion. But when I think about like who I'll be treating and what status they're in, or like what their socioeconomic status is, I definitely think that this opens your eyes to, if you want to go into a service program or things like that, it's going to change the way that you look at your patients and how you would want to be treated if you didn't have the same amount of money as maybe some other person. So I think it was really insightful, not only for myself, but to see it from other people's perspectives as well.
Great, thank you. Carrera, thank you for your note about like changes the way I look at the, can you kind of maybe, if it'd be okay if you can can you elaborate more on that, or tell us what changed for you?
Yeah, I can elaborate a bit more about what I wrote in the chat. So for me, definitely the financial aspect is a big part of looking for a job, because yes, I want to have a job that like I enjoy, but also how much can you enjoy a job if like you're struggling with everything else in your life. So having this like knowing how much is living wage versus how much is minimum wage, and all these like financial aspects that we don't really learn. These are things that you learn only when you're an adult. So I feel like it's very important for me to learn these things now, so that I have like a better like start when looking for which career or major I want to go into for college, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Anyone else?
So I want to be a social worker in justice and correctional facilities. And basically with me going in that career path, it's all about like the passion. Like I mean, of course the money comes, you think about it, but my main thing was the passion that I had behind it. But I feel like as you're helping people, you kind of take their backgrounds into consideration. So like with the people that I'm helping, you have to look beyond them and then look at their families, like how were they when they were growing up, like were they struggling when they grew up, and that can play like aspects into their life after that. So I feel like this kind of will help me in my future career with understanding the different backgrounds of different people.
Yeah, and like it maybe even helping you like when you coach others and thinking about their career and stuff like that as well, right? All right, I have one more question for you all, but I'm gonna skip it. I think I got a sense of like, maybe what should be emphasized this. Maybe what we'll do on our end is we will kind of send you guys like a quick poll or like survey, but it will be just these 3 questions, and maybe you guys can type out kind of a more elaborate answer. But I really want to thank you all for your feedback, kind of your participation and your support here. It's been like very illuminating for me as well. And just want to thank you guys, and hopefully we'll be collaborating more over time.